Hello again, everyone. I'm Dr. George Simon, and welcome to another edition of the new Character Matters program. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we have faced for so many years now, and that has affected so many areas of our lives, and what we can do to turn the tide. And in today's program, we're going to be transitioning between some of the 10 commandments of character that I've been talking about in prior programs. And we'll be talking about some more in programs to come, and that are the main subject of a book that is soon to be published, probably my last written work, tentatively titled Essentials for the Journey, Embracing and Living the 10 Commandments of Character, Proven Life Axioms, Important Principles that, when properly embraced and lived out, can make all the difference with respect to helping us be all that we can be, helping us develop integrity, restoring integrity to our relationships, to our politics, to all of our affairs, and helping us solve so many of the issues that divide and plague us these days. And to just briefly review where we have been, the first so-called commandments that we've been talking about, the first three, have a lot to do with developing a positive sense of self, a healthy sense of self, overcoming our inherent egocentricity, seeing beyond ourselves, seeing the bigger picture, coming to appreciate that we're part of something very vast, and that there is something hard to wrap our heads around, hard to wrap our hearts around, energizing this universe and bringing life to us. And so in the end, it's not all about us, even though we're also kind of hardwired to think so. It's an interesting paradox, how we are hardwired in a way to be utterly self-focused and to live our lives in a way that we think will profit us the most, bring us the most pleasure, bring us the most wealth, security, et cetera, only to realize that life is much more than that. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than any of us. And that there's nothing really we can do to buy time or to earn this precious gift. So we have to overcome that innate tendency to be so narrowly focused and learn how to step outside of ourselves to not only see the bigger picture, but to embrace it. And the second commandment has to do with being grateful for this precious unearned gift that life is, and expressing that gratitude in the way we live our lives, in the way that we deal with others, appreciating that there are no entitlements in life, that every breath we draw, in fact, is an unearned gift, however you want to see it. We're not the cause of it. We have no say-so, really, when it might be over. Not really. We think so. We delude ourselves into that. And true, there are some things we can do that improve our chances, generally speaking. But when you really think about it, we neither had say-so about being here in the first place, And at some point, this precious gift is going to pass. And everything that we enjoy, comes to us out of a benevolence from this universe that's hard for us to really appreciate. And that leads us to the third commandment, which has to do with developing a healthy and balanced sense of self. Has to do with having a balanced sense of our worth, not being so self-demeaning and having such low self-esteem or sense of worth that we don't treat ourselves very well, and we allow ourselves to be subjected to ill treatment. That's one side of the coin. But then the other side of the coin is thinking we're all that, thinking we're so important, so precious to the universe that it can't do without us, and that we're entitled to have whatever we want and to take it without concern for who it might impact. So it behooves us to step outside of ourselves, overcome our inherent egocentricity and selfishness, and also to develop a balanced sense of what we're worth, neither thinking too little of ourselves or too much of ourselves. So the first three of these so-called commandments of character development all have to do with developing a sense of self that is both positive and energizing and enlivening. It has to do with really beginning to live fully. And then comes the all-important commandment of revering truth. Proper reverence for the truth is pivotal to character. When we regard its power and its freeing aspects with the awe and reverence that we should, we deal with others in a different way. We deal with others authentically. And we deal with ourselves authentically. For perhaps those are the greatest lies that we tell, the lies that we tell ourselves. And perhaps that, more than anything else, our dishonesty with ourselves, is the reason so many of us fail to grow. When we honestly reckon with our strengths and our weaknesses, with our talents and our abilities, as well as our brokenness, when we honestly reckon with all that we have within us and all that has contributed to our formation, all that the world has done to us, all the defenses we have built. When we honestly reckon with those things, we have the chance to grow. We have the chance to be all that we can be. And that ushers in a whole new set of principles essential to our character growth. And that we'll begin to talk about in today's program. The fifth, sixth, and seventh commandment that I write about in my book, Character Disturbance, and that will be amplified greatly in my upcoming book, Essentials for the Journey, have to do with basically managing ourselves, learning how to self-regulate, how to manage our appetites and aversions, how to lead a life that's not driven by impulse, but rather guided by a mindful assessment of what would be the more prudent course. And then lastly, having the will, the strength of will, properly developed and guided will, to make the better choice, even when it's tough, especially when it's tough. And so today we begin a discussion about a self-managed life, a life of appropriate discipline, not an overly regimented life, devoid of any zest or zeal for life itself, not an oppressive life, not one in which we so militaristically impose order on ourselves that we can hardly breathe, but nonetheless a life that is managed well enough that we're not at the mercy of our impulses, that we're guided by a degree of mindfulness that allows us to function in an appropriately self-managed way and enables us to function without exterior management and structure. Sadly, there are some individuals who never outgrow their need for external structure. I can tell you of countless individuals, for example, who in their later teen years or early 20s, knowing at some level that they could not manage themselves very well, that they lacked the internal discipline and resources necessary to function well in the world. I can't tell you how many of these folks told me stories of, say, entering the military was the solution to that, simply because they knew that they needed external discipline, simply because they knew that they needed some kind of order imposed on their lives and didn't feel capable of doing it themselves, and then thought that maybe if it was imposed on them within a tightly structured environment like the military, that maybe they could start shaping up in character. I can't tell you the number of stories that I've heard somewhat like that. I also know individuals, tragically, who depend upon substances of one type or another, whether legal or illegal, whether prescribed or not prescribed, to manage them. Now, when I lament this, I'm not in any way discounting those instances where, through no fault of a person's own, because of chemistry gone awry that had nothing to do with a person's repetitive behavior patterns, there are instances where individuals simply need the assistance of certain medicines to be appropriately regulated. However, all too many times these days, individuals depend on various substances and various external structures simply because they haven't learned how to manage themselves. This is tragic. There's a whole lot of freedom available to you when you know how to take care of yourself in a well-regulated way. When you're not at the mercy of your impulses, but you're guided by a thoughtful, mindful exercise of your will. So we're going to begin a discussion today about the self-regulated life. And the first of the three commandments dealing with that has to do with learning to manage our appetites and aversions. So to reiterate briefly, the commandments of sound character development that we've been talking about all work together. So before we proceed, it's important to recognize that. It's not that you have to master one to begin another. They all work together. There's no particular order, but they do complement one another. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, to have a healthy sense of self, we have to step outside of our own narrow, self-focused view of things. We have to overcome our innate egocentricity and see the bigger picture. We have to recognize that we have impact, that everything we do, say, even think, affects everything else. And so it pays us to be mindful of that impact. And it's also necessary to overcome any sense of entitlement and to really have an appreciation for this fantastic gift that we've been given. And then it's, of course, important that we develop a healthy sense of who we are and what we're worth. To understand not only what we're truly worth, but where that worth comes from, how it derives. A lot of people predicate their worth on how much money they've managed to make during their lifetime, how much material success they enjoy, how many possessions they have, how successful they've been in their career endeavors, et cetera, et cetera. Building a healthy sense of what we're worth is crucial to healthy character. So before we can even begin a discussion about what a healthy, self-regulated life looks like, how a well-managed and well-disciplined life looks like, we have to have a positive sense of ourselves, and we have to have reverence for the truth of matters, because overcoming some of our primal tendencies and elevating ourselves to a higher plane of living is not easy. It requires the utmost in discipline. And if there were ever a problem that we face today, if there were ever a problem that comes to the attention of so many mental health professionals of all persuasions these days, it's individuals who feel that their lives are out of control and they're looking for someone or something to help manage what they haven't learned how to manage for themselves. I can't count the number of folks who have come to a therapeutic encounter with me in counseling, hoping that I would basically have an answer for them about what they needed to do in their lives, because they don't have a sense themselves of how they would best take care of themselves. And of course, it's not the job of any therapist, not really the job of any therapist, even though some may take the bait there, to prescribe how someone should conduct themselves. Rather, as I see it, the job of a good therapist these days is to help a person develop the tools and the skills and the internal resources they need to regulate themselves and to lead a truly independent life. Folks who don't develop the skills end up being inordinately dependent in many ways, and therefore they frequently enter into and remain in relationships that are in some way exploitative or abusive. And then, of course, there are others who are very confident in their ability to manipulate their environment and their ability to get the things that they want. They've learned the tricks, basically, of getting other people to do their bidding, of securing the things that they want by hook or by crook. And they end up oftentimes exploiting and abusing in relationships. Unless we know how to properly regulate ourselves, we can't have truly loving, intimate encounters with others. Relationships that only grow, that don't exploit, that don't take advantage of one another's needs, but rather respect the other for who the other is and cooperate, truly cooperate. in the process of personal growth and development. Not leading somebody else by the hand, not regimenting their life, but by participating in a mutual adventure of personal growth. So we begin a discussion today of a new commandment having to do with mastering appetites and aversions. We're going to spend some time on this one because we could say very easily that a part of the phenomenon of our times is the fact that we have too many folks these days with appetites way out of control. And I'm not just talking about appetites with respect to food. You don't have to look around very long to realize with the problems of obesity that we have and the diseases that accompany that, the metabolic disorders that accompany that, you don't have to look around very hard to understand that those appetites are way out of control. But our other appetites are out of control as well. For some people, it's their sexual appetites, just as it is for other people with food. Folks are capable these days of turning just about anything into an addiction. They don't seem to be able to control themselves. They can never get enough of a good thing. Before long, they become slaves because they haven't developed the capacity to self-regulate. So as I said moments ago, in the next few episodes, we're going to be focusing on how we come to learn to self-regulate in a healthy way, how we learn to manage ourselves, the axioms we need to heed in order to be appropriately self-disciplined and not out of control and not dependent on some external force to regulate us. And it all starts with mastering our appetites and aversions. So here is that commandment in a nutshell. It is the fifth and first of three commandments related to self-control. In a nutshell, it is master your appetites and aversions, your likes and your dislikes. Don't let the things that please you or the things that upset you or that irritate you or that you naturally have a distaste for, don't let those things run your life. You run your life. You be the master. Those things that you find appealing and those things you find distasteful are meant to guide you, not own you. They're meant to be servants of the greater cause of life. They are not meant to be life. And if there were any proof of that, it would be my years of experience with folks that have indulged themselves plenty. They have scoffed up wantonly everything they crave rabidly, and they have run from everything they find displeasing in some way, all too often. And you would think that they should be happy because they've avoided all the things unpleasant and they've had plenty of the things that they like. And yet they're empty and miserable underneath it all, living lives with no purpose. And they wonder why they're unhappy. This is a very, very deep subject. And because it's such a deep subject, it's worth spending time with. I've written before on the importance of living life beyond the mere pleasure principle that most of us come into this world living our lives on and stay living on for most of our lives. Life lived beyond the mere pleasure principle is a fuller, richer life, but very few folks get there without an awful lot of character development. And unfortunately, these days, we don't have enough in our cultural systems. We don't have enough support to encourage that level of character development. So I encourage you to avail yourself of some of the articles on this topic on my blog at drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. You can find several articles about living life beyond the pleasure principle. You can also find information on this in my book, Character Disturbance, and also my book, The Judas Syndrome. Character disturbance in particular has quite a bit to say about this topic. Now, I also have an announcement to make with respect to the next edition of Character Matters. Next week's podcast will be a YouTube live event. We will begin the event at 10:30 a.m. Central Time, US. That's 10:30 a.m. Central Time, US, 10:30 to 11:30. I'm allowing an hour for the program because we will be able to take calls, and I will announce several times during the program the number to call. I'll also put the information about the program, the time of the program, and the number to call on the Character Matters page of the blog. And if you want to submit questions in advance that I can address on the program, use the contact feature, the Contact Dr. George Simon page, and submit your questions in advance, and I'm happy to tend to them. So once again, we're going to be beginning a discussion that'll be fairly substantial on the importance of a life not driven by impulse, but rather guided by a rightly formed and rightly purposed will, where we learn to manage our appetites of aversions. We learn how to transcend the mere pleasure principle that most of us operate on for most of our lives, to not be a slave to our appetites and our aversions, to not let those things that we think will please us govern our lives, and not let those things that we find distasteful govern our lives either. We tend to want to gravitate toward those things we think will bring us pleasure, and we tend to avoid those things that we find distasteful. But sometimes to really grow, especially to grow in character, we have to deny ourselves momentary pleasures for longer term gains. And we also have to make ourselves face the unpleasant, because many times it's in facing those unpleasant things, those things we'd rather avoid, that we not only grow in character, but we improve the quality of our lives. So we'll have a robust discussion about this in the next few episodes, and we'll be able to take your questions live on the next edition of the new Character Matters. Please check out the blog site at drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon, not only for the latest post, but also for the information on the program. You can also check this YouTube channel as well. And the number to call on the day of the live broadcast will be on the Character Matters page. And you can also submit questions in advance by using the Contact Dr. George Simon feature. Once again, thanks for tuning in. I'm Dr. George Simon. I'll see you next time on the new Character Matters. Take care.